Welcome to Noir Alley. I'm Eddie Muller, coming to you from bar 355. This week, I couldn't decide if I wanted to show a traditional murder story or a boxing drama. So I went with a picture that's a combination of both. Sort of body and soul crossed with The Postman Always Rings Twice. But since it's called Bad Blonde and stars the scandalous starlet Barbara Payton, it's pretty obvious which half of that combination packs the heavier punch. But Payton is not the only one providing the sexy allure. The filmmakers spend just as much, if not more time, exploiting the fleshy appeal of young star Tony Wright, a former amateur boxer being groomed for stardom as a sort of British version of Tab Hunter. In fact, in England, where it was made, the picture was released in 1953 as The Flanagan Boy, and the promotion mainly focused on the sex appeal of its male star, who was making his movie debut. This is one of several pictures made in a joint venture between Hammer in the UK and Robert Lippert, an American producer of mostly B movies. Lippert provided American stars to ensure these British-made B films would get a release in the United States. This one, for example, had the title changed to capitalize on Barbara Payton's notoriety in this country. In September of 1951, Payton ate up ink in the gossip columns for being the real-life femme fatale in a romantic rivalry between her soon-to-be husband, actor Frank Otone, and her lover, actor and former boxer Tom Neal, known around here as the star of the legendary B noir Detour. Neal cracked Tone's skull in a fistfight, and as a result, all their careers were hospitalized. Payton, who had recently had a hit with Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye with Jimmy Cagney, had seemed headed for stardom when the scandal made her persona non grata in Hollywood. But the opportunistic Mr. Lippert found her this gig in England, where Hammer happily exploited the sensationalism surrounding the actress. The selling point was having this sexy American tramp seduce their pure virginal Brit. And Payton had no problem leaning into the stereotype, which is pretty much what she'd do for the rest of her short, troubled life. This story is such a blatant knockoff of The Postman Always Rings Twice, you might assume it was dashed off by some journeyman hack. But Max Caddo, whose novel provided the source material, was just getting started on what would be a long, versatile career as a novelist and a playwright. 10 of his books were made into films, including Trapeze, A Prize of Gold, Fire Down Below, Seven Thieves, and Murphy's War. Richard Landau, the co-screenwriter, also had an extremely long and varied career. In fact, he has a hand in writing all the Hammer films I'll be showing this year on Noir Alley. When writing stuff like this, originality was not the point. The writer's job was to provide just enough to produce something watchable on absolutely no budget. The lone wrinkle in this script, Payton's husband being a garrulous Italian with an old-world family, may have been influenced by co-screenwriter Guy Elms's working on many Italian co-productions. And let's just say that Frederick Valk, who plays Giuseppe Vecchi, gives a generous performance, as in a little bit of this guy goes a long way. Also starring Sid James, on the cusp of becoming one of the most well-known performers in England, and directed by Hollywood veteran Reginald LeBorg, another Lippert contribution. Here is The Flanagan Boy, also known as Bad Blonde. One of the things I like about this movie is its somewhat unique resolution, in which Sharkey flips the script on Lorna and frames her for Johnny's murder, despite his not really knowing for certain whether she poisoned him or he killed himself. Sometimes noir stories that end with the cops arriving in the nick of time can leave you disappointed. But this one works, especially with the coda where Sharkey and Charlie are back on the Midway, still prowling for suckers, just not quite as avidly as before. Sharkey was played by Sid James, who was born in South Africa as Solomon Joel Cohen, And like a lot of actors of that era, he bounced around through a bunch of jobs before becoming a performer, including stints as a diamond cutter, a hairdresser, and a boxer. Once he moved to London in 1946, he got regular screen roles, mostly as a heavy in crime pictures. But he made a big impression in his first comedy, 1951's The Lavender Hill Mob, which set him on a course playing shifty operators with a raucous streak of humor and a distinctive laugh. In 1954, he partnered with Tony Hancock, one of Britain's most popular comics, for Hancock's Half Hour, a radio show that was even more popular when it moved to television. Sid James played a character called Sid James, a fair formula for making yourself a household name. The partnership ended in acrimony, however, when after 4 years, Hancock ended the series to go solo. But James was promptly cast in the Carry On film series, the most popular movie franchise in British history. James was almost solely responsible for popularizing the expression, "Cool, blimey," which became his trademark. He would carry on 22 times between 1961 and 75, becoming so well known to British audiences that mostly he just played characters named Sid. The director of Bad Blonde, Reginald Leborg, was born in Vienna as Harry Grebel. His father was a wealthy banker who in the 1920s entrusted his son to handle his financial affairs in the States. But Harry spent more time hanging around with theater people and artists, and when the stock market crash of 1929 bankrupted the Grebel family, young Harry took it as his cue to head to Hollywood, change his name, and take a crack at pictures. Leborg, you may have figured out, is Grebel spelled backwards. Although he started with grand ambitions and a willingness to handle any kind of assignment, by the mid-40s, Leborg was a mainstay in the B trenches, versatile enough to make pictures in every genre, but none of them earning him better scripts or bigger budgets. Exactly the kind of director a guy like Robert Lippert could use as part of one of his transatlantic production packages. Leborg would leave a legacy as one of the most prolific makers of mediocre movies ever. The fate of Barbara Payton gave her a legacy of a different sort. She died at 39 from acute alcoholism after spiraling into a lonely and degrading life that led her to prostituting herself on Sunset Boulevard for drinking money. Her co-star, Tony Wright, fared a little better. He could speak fluent French, which got him the lead in a series of French films about a private eye named Slim Callahan. Wright's popularity peaked when he married actress Janet Monroe, star of the Disney films Swiss Family Robinson and Darby O'Gill in The Little People. The marriage didn't last, which you might expect when your wife says, "There was little talent to back up Tony's looks, and I felt a deep compassion for him." Like Barbara Payton, Wright also had issues with alcohol, but he managed to make it to 60 before dying in a fall at his London home. Next week on Noir Alley, I'm presenting an encore of a film I showed a few years ago, one of the weirdest and most unclassifiable noirs from the classic era. If you're a fan of Robert Mitchum or Jane Russell, or especially Vincent Price, you'll want to be here for His Kind of Woman, a 1951 oddity from RKO, directed by John Farrow and Richard Fleischer. You know there's a story behind that. And I'll have it for you at Bar 355 next week. Until then, see you in the shadows.
Next on TCM, The Bad Seed, then Bad Boy, and later, The Pirate. TCM walks the plank tonight.